Well, folks, we're back with another Sunken City card review. This time we got some fun stuff to talk through, like Eni Stormcoil, new neutral legendary minion here. We've seen her teased in the trailer, and here's her card finally. She's a new 5-mana 4/4 with Battlecry. Choose a friendly mech, and then summon a copy of that mech with Rush, Wind Fury, and Divine Shield. So clearly, if you can have any kind of decent sized mech here on board and you land an Eni Stormcoil on it, that's going to be a nice board swing potential. Basically a 4/4 summoning another bigger thing with some premium keywords with Wind Fury and Divine Shield, maybe taking a trade into your opponent's board and leaving you with potentially 3+ minions on a board. And that's pretty cool, right? Like, we like mech synergies. We've seen a few of these teas already with Paladin and Mage in particular, got some mech cards. So this could be a piece of the puzzle in those mech decks. And the like crazy high roll potential on this is kind of bonkers with some of those colossal minions in particular. Remember, if you summoned the body of the colossal, the main part, it's going to bring its appendages with it when summoned by Eni Stormcoil. So like with the Mage Colossal, for instance, you're not just going to be summoning the Colossal, it's going to bring some 2-3 rush minions with it as well. So clearly the sky is the limit on the summons here. But, and this is where people are going to get mad at me, I think I'm going to have quite a few reviews here where a lot of you get mad. But that's okay. I got to go with conviction here over appeasing the populace. I know what you want to hear. You want every card to be good. I actually think Eni's going to have some troubles here. I talked her up a lot there at the beginning for this big butt, because I like big butts. I cannot lie. So here's the problem, right? Think about a card like Menagerie Warden. Do you remember Menagerie Warden? It's now a 5-mana 4/4 for Druid, and it summons you of a copy of a beast on board. It does not give the beast Rush, Wind Fury, and Divine Shield. Clearly, Eni is a plussed up version of the Menagerie Warden. But that was never the problem for Menagerie Warden. I've tried to make that card work 47 times, and the problem is always that it's really hard to get a good beast to stick on board. Hearthstone has a lot of removal and reactivity these days, and typically your opponent is going to be removing your stuff, so that it's really hard for cards like Eni or Menagerie Warden to have a good target on board. And frankly, if they do leave behind a really good target, and the better the target, the more this is true, often you would want a card that helps you end a game or finish or leverage that leftover minion and the leftover tempo, as opposed to a card that helps you maybe just build a little bit more board. So often you might want finishers if you're in those positions. When we look at a deck like Beast Druid right now, for instance, the 5-mana slot's not Menagerie Warden, it's Arbor Up, because Arbor Up gives you ways to have some lethality. When we look at other decks, like tempo decks, we often see Battlegrounds Battle Master being run in these kind of mid-rangey slots. Right now it's 1 mana more, but came out at 5 because that offers you the lethality. If you stick a minion, sometimes it's just better to go face with it. And Eni, much like Menagerie Warden, doesn't really provide that. She's still much better than Menagerie Warden, to be clear, because of all these plussed up keywords. But she doesn't really give you that turn the corner potential as much. She just kind of helps you do what you were already doing fairly well. I'm not even going to call her a win more card. It's just like a play more card as opposed to end the game sort of card. So I worry, in other words, that there's going to be a lot of board states where you get to turn 5 and you don't have a mech on board and you're sitting on Eni and it's like, oh man, what do I do now? I need to reload, and this is not a reload tool, and it's not really a great finisher tool. It's just kind of this mid-range puzzle piece that doesn't really help me get anywhere. So I know that like the pie in the sky dreams for these cards are super fun. I'm obviously going to try to make that work as well. Like, obviously I want to summon Gaia off Mage and get multiple Gaias with Eni and stuff. That sounds so much fun, but that's not a real game state scenario. And you can't really say like, oh, okay, well then save this to play with a mech. All the good ones are either too expensive or it's just too late in the game by then. You know, even if you play this like a 3-drop mech, it's turn 8 or 9. Have you really done enough at that stage of the game? Probably not. I think this is only really a sensible card within a turn or two of its original mana cost. You don't want to be playing it much later. I think it falls off really quickly in those scenarios. So I just think Eni's going to be more awkward than not, because sometimes you just don't have the bodies on board, or if there is a body left on board, it's usually like the weakest, most non-impactful one. Oh, they left behind a 1/1 microbot. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I got a 4/4 and a 1/1 with some keywords. That's not exciting either. So I would encourage you to think about the floors for cards like this, not just the ceilings, because sometimes those floors are really dreadful, and I feel like Eni is going to be a dead card that fails in hand far too often. So I don't love this card. I'm sorry. I know you want to be excited about it, but I don't think she's that good. All right, next up is what we always wanted, more Mage mana cheat. It's the Spite Lash Siren here, a new 4-mana epic for Mage. She is a 2/5 Naga, and she reads, after you play a Naga, refresh 2 mana crystals, and then it's going to switch to spell. So what that means is after you play that Naga, she's then going to say, after you play a spell, refresh 2 mana crystals. And then presumably will continue to swap indefinitely so that you can just play a lot of stuff. So if you get yourself in a world where you have some cheap spells and some cheap or even moderately cheap Naga, you're going to be able to do a lot in a single given turn. And if you're able to weave in any other kind of cost discounts that might exist, you know, pseudo infinite possibilities always start to exist with engines like this that allow you to just continually refresh mana. I get some vibes of Warlock's mana cheat when taking damage, like Dark Glare, for instance. This is a little bit more expensive at its base at 4 mana, so it might take a little bit longer to get an engine like this up to speed, but in the mid game, the swing potential, the chain potential always becomes really frightening with cards like this. I don't know that you have quite as much like banked combo cheese potential as with a card like Mana Biscuits. Those you could kind of hold in hand and set up for that one crazy turn. This might be a little bit harder because you got this 4 mana overhead on the Siren itself to kick things off. So there might be some limitations there and some delays in this. But even though I can't exactly envision how this card is going to work, we don't know exactly what Naga and spell packages are going to be available for Mage, it just does a lot. And it has the potential to cheese. And cards like this historically in Hearthstone have found ways to work. People figure out decks where it's like, oh God, they mastered the Spite Lash Siren. We're in trouble. They have tons of mana. How is this going to swing games and win games? The possibilities are definitely there. So I think Spite Lash Siren is certainly a card to keep a very, very close eye on. Moving on here to Chum Bucket for Warlock. A new 2 mana spell, more on the Murloc Warlock stuff. And this one has an interesting mechanic. I'm actually going to use Druid as another comparison here. This one gives all Murlocs in your hand +1/+1, and it's going to repeat for each Murloc that you control. So the ideal scenario here is you have a big board of Murlocs and you have a big hand of Murlocs, and you slam Chum Bucket, and you're going to get some notably gigantic buffs in hand, right? That's the dream. The more realistic scenario is like, okay, I got 2 or 3 Murlocs. I got a hand of 3 or 4 Murlocs. I play Chum Bucket. Maybe I'm happy to get a +2, +2, +3/+3 if things are going really well. It feels a bit like conditioning a little bit in that regard. The hand buff card for Warrior that scaled as your mana cost went up. But this is another one that I feel like is a little bit at odds with itself, because it's best when you have a big board, and when you have a big board, you're less likely to have a big hand. Sometimes it's really hard to do both of those things, because if you're playing out your resources, you're playing out your minions, even if there are spells that summon minions, you're playing those out, you're less likely to have a big handful of minions. And if you do have a big handful of minions, sometimes it's because you've been sitting and waiting, and you're stretching further into the game, and that is where stats tend to matter less. You want those big tempo boards and those aggressive stats to hit earlier in the game, so they're more likely to be impactful, get in under your opponent's removal or your opponent's win condition. So basically, this is encouraging you to kind of go backwards for a tempo deck. Like, I've got this board full of stuff. Most decks want either a follow-up or reload. If we think about Beast Druid again as the kind of go-to minion-based tempo deck these days, we've got, what's the name of the card? I'm blanking. Composting as the 2 mana wide board follow-up card for Druid. And why does Composting make sense? Because I've just dumped all my stuff on board, Now I need to reload, and composting gives Druid that reload so they have more ways to dump another board and keep the pressure maintained. Chum Bucket, on the other hand, if you've gone all in, there's nothing left in hand for you to buff. Maybe you just get 2 or 3 minions and it's less exciting than if you had that full board. So they, as you can see, they kind of solve different problems. And I think this card creates this weird space. And like, yes, of course, Warlock is a class that can draw cards pretty reliably, but that means you're spending mana on either card draw or life taps and not developing tempo. So again, you're just pushing your tempo game plan, your stat and minion-based game plan further and further into the game, where I think it's less and less likely to be competitive. So there's just a lot about this that feels like it's at odds with itself. I'm not saying there's not some magic middle ground where maybe 2 or 3 minions is enough. Sometimes that mid-game conditioning was good enough. In Rush Warrior, of course, they had lots of ways to generate small rushers and pay that off. Maybe Murloc Warlock will also get that, create some Murlocs in hand and such. But it's specific to Murlocs. It's at odds with itself in a lot of ways. It's kind of against the Murloc game plan in a lot of ways as well. It only buffs Murlocs in hand, so there are a lot of checks on this card, and when you have that many hurdles to jump, I really, really worry about its success. All right, next up here is the Smothering Starfish, a new 3-mana neutral minion. It's a 2/4 beast, and its battle cry silences all other minions. So this is the granddaddy silence on a minion here, with a battle cry too. We have seen that dude from Dark Moon that had the death rattle silence minions, but this is a battle cry, so you can do it whenever you want. So of course, an insane answer to, you know, a frozen board. Shaman freezes your board. Well, unfreeze all those minions and do whatever you like and turn their 15/15 into a 3/3 along the way. If your opponent has a bunch of taunts you need to push through, slam the Starfish, remove those taunts, and just go face. If they have cool death rattle or value cards, silence them out. Who cares? The Starfish answers everything. And in some ways that makes me nervous. Like, Blizzard just printed all these cool, awesome, big colossals and neat effect cards, and then all it takes is one Starfish to come along and silence them off. But my concerns are eased a little because I think silence as a tech card has really fallen off in Hearthstone as of late. We used to have like Spellbreaker in every deck. And then I thought like, oh, the nameless one in Priest is going to be Spellbreaker 2.0 and come along and be amazing. And it didn't. And a lot of silence cards don't get played these days. Even with the prevalence of things like Free Shaman, we still haven't seen much silence. That said, this one's just bigger. It's the whole board. It's much better against Freeze, for instance. It's very impactful. They have multiple taunts. This handles all of the taunts. So I do think this has a slightly better chance, or notably better chance, let's say, than previous silence cards of getting played. Still not going to be in every deck, though, I don't think. I don't think this is a tech card that makes its way into the meta across the board. Number one, it doesn't have tradable. That's what's really helped tech cards succeed recently, like Russerod Viper. Very easy to play tech cards if you can trade them out in matchups where they don't matter. Sometimes you're going to be sitting on a dead card in hand here, so there's some real opportunity cost to running these tech silences like this for matchups where you're not required to use them. So I think that's a real risk and limitation for a card like this, and that's why it won't be played a lot across the meta. But I still think some decks that are really desperate for taunt removal or just need this tool, maybe even a Silence Priest pops up, although I doubt it. There's going to be some decks that are able to use this successfully as a just high output tech card because it just does so much and it's so decisive in this silence. That will be impactful in some board states and will earn its spot in a deck here and there. But I don't think this is like an every deck tech card like I'm seeing a lot of people say. Still will have limitations. Eni Stormcoil is a 2-star card. Oh god, I can see the comments now. Spitelash Siren is a 4-star card. Chum Bucket is a 3-star card. Smothering Starfish is a 3-star card. Yeah, there you go, folks. Review number 14. Curious to hear your Eni Stormcoil takes. By God, please. If you disagree, that's great. A lot of people do. I knew that going in. Don't just say no. She's gonna be good. Talk about why. Explain the game states, the scenarios, the decks. Give logic and reasons. I spent 5 minutes explaining why I think I have some hesitations about Eni. I hate the no, she's good comments, which of course, now that I've said that, 90% of you will leave a comment that says, no, she's good. So I look forward to that. That said, as always, thanks much for watching. Stay tuned for, I think, one more card review this week, maybe. Then it seems like we might have a little bit of a gap, but we'll get cards out as soon as they're available. And anyway, thanks for watching, and until next time, game on.